Explore the SB150, the discontinued trail/enduro bike from Yeti. So mostly I'm going to be focusing on the Switch Infinity link that this discontinued SB150 has. So is that premium head badge from Colorado really worth its expensive price tag? Well, taking a close look at this bike, it's an absolute masterpiece of manufacturing. It just screams quality everywhere you look. The SB150 having 150 millimeters of rear wheel travel may seem disappointing, but the important thing is this bike takes a 230/60 shock. So you need to not look at the travel, you need to look at the shock size. And this bike is super special because we have the Switch Infinity link. So I put it upside down so I can see what it does up close and personal. Once you get the shock to about 50% of its travel, the Switch Infinity link changes direction. So you're basically getting like two different leverage curves in one package. The rear of the shock bolts into the rear triangle, and it's a super unique mechanism that splits apart in two. Yeti is definitely not a cattle in the herd. They have a unique way to mount their shock. To be real, this adds a whole bunch of complexity to the bicycle. So basically you have two rear shocks and a whole bunch of fancy linkages. Now let's take a look at the carbon inside of the head tube. So we have a direct bearing sitting in carbon. That's not my favorite because I had a Specialized Enduro blow up. So hopefully Yeti has some higher quality controls and they don't have headset cracking issues. On a modern trail enduro bike, travel is the most irrelevant number you can look at as far as a bike's capability. The Yeti SB150 having a 230/60 shock, this is a certified enduro bike. With a 500mm reach in this extra large and a 64.5 degree head tube angle, this bike should be pretty capable. If you're familiar with shock sizes, a 210/55 is a trail size shock. These shocks can overheat and they're a little bit smaller. For this ride, I've a Push 11.6, one of the most prestigious rear shocks in the mountain biking game. The small bump sensitivity check on the SB150 is super impressive. So a solid rear triangle typically doesn't have the best small bump sensitivity and they will be a better pedaler, but this bike has the Switch Infinity and it really impressed me so far. So I'm like 6'2" and this bike is an extra large. It does feel like it's a little bit on the smaller side, which makes sense because Yeti makes race bikes and you want a small maneuverable bike when you're racing, I guess. This is one of the most impressive bikes I've ever made videos of. It is absolutely amazing between the Switch Infinity link and its perfect assembly or craftsmanship throughout. This is a used bike and it is absolutely in perfect condition and showroom quality. Not to mention a Push 11.6 on the Switch Infinity, this should be a really good ride. To be genuinely honest, I was afraid of the SB150. Everything Yeti does or markets about their bikes is this is a race-proven bike that's going to win races. And I'm never going to do a race, so I don't think Yeti's the bike for me. But the bike is incredibly quiet. And I'm pleasantly here to report to you that the trail experience, your normal cross-country trail experience, was really good on this bike. It pedals nice. And it feels pretty darn comfortable for a quote-unquote race bike. If you're not familiar, racing bicycles, racing motorcycles, they can be extremely uncomfortable because they only have one purpose and it's to go super fast down a racetrack. The Yeti doesn't give me that very uncomfortable feel. Other race bikes I've rode, you have to be like in the full attack position to get any life out of this bike. I'm like actually having a really good trail ride on the SB150. First tiny steep section on the Yeti SB150, I was a little bit nervous because it's a new bike. Standing up on the pedals and dropping in, I was pleasantly surprised to find this bike feel very confident and capable on steeper sections. Pushing out of that steeper section, I flip my 11.6 push shock into the climb position for the heinous climb out. Well, any climb is heinous if you're not on an e-bike, right? So the Yeti SB150 with its Switch Infinity link, it pedals really good. I was absolutely blown out of the water. Every piece of your energy into the pedals translates into forward momentum, and this is hands down one of the best bikes I've ever climbed, and I've been on this bike for maybe 10 minutes. I don't know about you, but I ride my bikes to go down the hill. The rear suspension feels pretty bottomless, which is a good thing when you're dealing with 150 millimeters of travel. This is no trail bike. It is definitely enduro bike. You need to not look at the travel number. I suspect they discontinued this SB150 because there's too much crossover to the 165. And the SB165 probably has a 5mm longer stroke shock. So I'm a mediocre level rider, and I don't jump super good, but I can report the rear suspension platform has a nice progressivity and quite a bit of predictability. Coming into these steeper sections, it's hard to gauge the rear suspension in this bike because it's rocking a push 11.6. You know, that's one of the most prestigious shocks in the mountain biking game. If it had a float X on it, I could tell you exactly how good the rear suspension is, but with the 11.6, in the chunky downhill lines, this is one of the most impressive rear suspensions I have literally ever felt. But keep in mind, the Push 11.6 shock is somewhere between $1,200 and $1,600, nearly half the price of this bicycle. Personally, the last reason I would buy a bike is because of its pedaling efficiency. But having that much efficiency has its benefits. You can get up to speed quick for a jump line and you can feel confident. Some bikes will kind of wallow around when you're pedaling and you would need a longer runway to get up to full speed. This section of trail really highlights the Yeti. Super capable in the steep, gnarly sections, giving you confidence on the downhill. Hit a couple gears and it literally climbs like a cross-country bike. This is the best analog Amish bike I've ever climbed on that section of trail. And don't forget about the Yeti's rear suspension being just progressive enough to not bottom out on big hits while maintaining its small bump sensitivity. Now the SB150 may have its race DNA, but it's really an outstanding trail bike. I had an excellent experience on this bike, but there was a few issues that did arise. And this issue may not bother you. It does have a pretty tall seat tube. This could be corrected with a different dropper post. The other issue is this bike is just incredibly nice and I was afraid to get it dirty. It may be a mud trap with the Switch Infinity link down in the rear linkage. This video is about you finding information on this bike. So personally, I love a low stack height. This bike has a 634 stack height in extra large, which felt awesome to me. But if you don't like a low stack height, you may want to look at a different bike. Overall though, this is the best race bike I have ever rode. The Switch Infinity link is like having your cake and eating it. Capable on the downs and climbs like a cross-country bike.